Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. We're recording this session, except for the third presentation, which I'll explain later. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia, and in particular and their continuing presence and connection with the land and water and culture. And we're particularly welcoming or thanking the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the owners of where we're broadcasting this from. And I also recognise that some of the others in other parts of Australia. So we acknowledge the presence of their landowners. Okay, so today we have three presentations. All by PhD students in the School of Geosciences. And we will record the first two. The third one we won't be recording because the speaker says it's very early in his research and he'd rather not record it at first. So let's start. Okay, with the people on Zoom, please make sure that their sound is off. Okay, so we'll introduce Sandar, who is the first presenter. And she, this one, isn't it? Okay. So you're on. And Sandar's just submitted a PhD. Congratulations.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to present my PhD research project, Why Climate Change Adaptation is Elusive, the Lived Reality of Farming Household in the Central Province of Myanmar. First, the climate change is one of the most serious problems confronting the humanity. It has impacted all parts of the world, causing that widespread depressions that have the economic consequences. It is the major issue, particularly for the global south, because the global south is where the poverty is prevalent and agriculture is the main income source of the country population. So the farmers in the global south are very vulnerable to the climate change because of its direct link to the natural environment and their limitation on their capability to the adaptation to the poverty. In this case, the questions of how farmers in the global south respond to the climate stress is very important to understand for the current and future vulnerabilities. However, the relationship between agriculture and climate change is contextualized by other major factors currently impacting on the real livelihoods. Many researchers have made the highlight there how the decline of the rural population reliance on the famines and higher engagement in the non-farm and migration. But the existing literature related to the agriculture and climate change often highlight the roles of climate change exclusively on the agriculture. So it neglects the fact that climate change has intertwined with the wider array of the human activities. So it is very important to understand and integrate the climate change to the time-forced livelihood arrangement of the rural population. So this is the conceptual framework of the research. The place-based approach were developed based on the 10% Conway sustainable livelihood approach to use as a framework to consider the issues of the how the livelihoods arrangements are intersecting with the climate change. In this case, the relationship between climate change and agriculture is especially relevant for Myanmar because Myanmar is an agriculturally based country, and also the most of the country population live in the rural area, and most of their livelihoods are engaged in agriculture and allied activities. As Myanmar is ranked second among the countries at risk from climate-related hazard, the farmers and farming households in Myanmar are very vulnerable to the climate stress. It is aggravated by the fact that Myanmar is weak in the process of climate change adaptation and vulnerability assessment. The Central Province is the region it's very relevant for that kind of assessment because it has the large number of the rural population live and also they reliant on the agriculture. And also the region is challenged by the climate change because where the farmings are, they're mostly the rain-fed famines and dryland famines and only relying on the rainfall, but the rainfall is very erratic in the recent years. These are the research questions of the project. The Yizhajo Township was selected as the study township. A township is the administrative unit in which both rural and urban areas are included. The Yizhajo Township was selected based on its characteristic of irregular rainfall, drought, and flood. And also in the township, I selected the 10 villages as the study area with their characterization of different biophysical environments, such as the dryland farming, lowland farming, and alluvial farming, and also the diverse livelihoods arrangement. These 10 villages were selected based on the discussion of township agriculture manager and based on the previous work done in that is the township by my supervisor. For the in-depth household interview, 10 households from each village were selected with the consultation of village head in order to cover all kind of the livelihoods activity in the village. Both focus group discussion and in-depth interviews were conducted to collect the information, and that the data collected were analyzed by using the qualitative analysis. This map is showing the place of the 10 villages, and based on the geographic conditions, there are the 3 types of famines were found in the study villages. It's the paddy famine, dryland famines, and alluvial famines. There are the 2 types of alluvial famine included. One is the alluvial land with the certified land certificate, and the second is the seasonal alluvial lands, which was formed by the current of the rivers. The most common famine system is the dryland famine in the study villages. These are the summary of the livelihoods found in the study areas. Although the township, Yizhajo Township, is relatively small, but the livelihoods found in the village rural area are very diverse and complex. It's have the combination of both farm and non-farm activities. Most of the farm activities are crop rotation, livestock rotation, and farmland rental, and the non-farm activities are government employment, self-employment, trading, and artisanal activities. These are the summary of the agricultural activities observed detailed in the field work. Mostly the geographic location make the diversify in the farming activities. The village which located near the canal, irrigation canal, are able to grow the 2-season crops, and the village without irrigation can grow only 1-season crop. And also it was found that alluvial land is the most valuable and fertile land, and it's the village whose own the alluvial land has the best agricultural performance. The dryland farming and grazing the livestock are the main principal livelihood activities for the dryland farming without irrigation. These are the summary of non-farm livelihood activities. Although the agriculture is the traditional primary livelihood, they are the diverse source of the non-farm activities for the rural community. So there is some paradox among the respondents. All the respondents answer the questions of how they hope for their children or grandchildren to become the educated and get the decent job in the city or in the government sector. But on the other hand, they still want for their children to keep the farming as a family heritage. However, that both farming and non-farm activities are coexist in the study villages, and it is interesting to see how these livelihood patterns are intersect with the climate change. First, all the interviews focus group discussion. I didn't mention purposely don't mention the climate change. I just asking their problems, and they all complain about how the longer drought and irregular rainfall, and even like they even can link to the to the point between the climate changes and the agricultural production, like the crop quality, crop productivity, like pest and disease outbreak due to the climate issue, and swine fertility depletion or the crop fail. But however, that means that even the even the dryland farmers, they don't make that issue make them stop doing the farming, because it's make them as a farming household in the community, and also they are the hoping that getting the benefit when the better times comes. So although there is the clear awareness of the climate change issue in the respondents, it is better to see how they can translate these perception to the adaptation behavior in their farming practices. They are the sort of the practices they do to make a farm adjustment they make to respond to the climate threats. The common one is the adjusting the sowing time. Regardless of all types of farmland, all the farmers need to adjust their sowing time based on the onset of the monsoon. And also the dryland farmer are passive, like the better tillage is the good for the absorbing the rainwater and maintain the moisture for the crop production. And even that there are some kind of farm activity, it's respond to the climate change, but there are some major farm adjustment. It is not response to the climate change, particularly in the crop selection. All the household interview I met, I'm just asking the plan for the next year. They just make the selection based on what could be the good market price in the next year. For example, seasoning. Seasoning is very popular as a climate sensitive crop, and they complain a lot about that only one rain can destroy all the seasoning yield just before the harvesting. But they have the plan to increase their cultivated area because of the better market price in the recent year due to their investment of the Korea seasoning fat processing factory in the region. And also another one is CP corn. The CP corns were grown in the alluvial land. Actually, alluvial land is the most profitable land for the dry zone area. But the old farmer replaced their traditional pulses like the black gram, green gram with the CP corn. They knew that CP corn can be deplete the soil fertility in the longer term, but they still keep doing that because of that. It's have the much higher market price compared to the traditional crops. Another case is like the farmers who has the access to the irrigations. It means they are the less vulnerable to the drought and irregular rainfall, but they still decided to run out their irrigated land to the melon farmers. The reason they give me is like that's income from the farmland render is like the secure for the household. It's if they grow the traditional crop like the rice or pulses, they are not so sure about the market price, even they are successful in the crop production. Some farm managements are moving away already from the traditional cropping. The interesting thing is the one new perennial crop. It is the wild almond trees. It was introduced in the very recent year to the central dry zone because of its potential market in the China. Some of the wealthier farming households start doing the investing in the perennial crops in their traditional crop production farms. And also the one village 8, totally transformed their crop production, and they totally give up their crop production and move to the goat production because they say it was opened after trade border for the livestock between the China and Myanmar. So there are some farm adjustments. It's made to the climate stress, but there are some major farm adjustments. It is not for they don't consider for the climate change. They just thinking of the market and household income. So this is the CP company. This is the rent out for the melon farmers. That's the wine almond tree orchard, the goat rearing. If so, in case of the non-farm categories, normally the non-farms are the key livelihood strategy to reduce the risk of the climate stress for the family household. But in here, national livelihood can be roughly identified the two, like the individual and village-wide. Individual is very simple, it's based on the education, can be like the teacher, doctor, or accountant. But the village-wide doesn't need the formal qualification or education, but it's need competence. And it's roughly can divided into three, like the traditional based, resource based, or location based. Traditional based mean like the that's non-farm livelihoods activity was carried out by the generation after generation, and it's helped the village to identify. For example, like the weaving, that's village do the weaving for their generation after generation. They modify, they learn the new format, and that village is famous for that format. So that kind of non-farm activities are not like the new things, it's based on the traditional. And also like the agriculture, some non-farm enterprise need the resources. For example, like the bread making, in order to make the bread, they need the specific kind of the swine. The one village are able to accept that swine because it's need the top layer of the swine to bake the bread. So that's made that the access to resource make that village to engage in that kind of enterprise. And also another one is location based. For example, the village mind, it is located between the 2 major river of the country, Irrawaddy River and Children River. It's make them the residents in the village in order to get the opportunity to work for the waterway transportation. It's the weaving, it's the bread making. For the migration pattern, both domestic and international migration has been observed. Most of the domestic migrations are related to non-farm work like the trading or carpenter. There's only few seasonal farm worker for the melon farming in the adjacent township. For the international migration, like the temporary migration to Thailand, Korea, and Malaysia, it's have been found like a decades ago. But the seasonal migration as a farm worker in China are very new. And surprisingly, the large population of the women from the most agriculture the best agriculture performance village work for the seasonal worker in the China. So it's mean like it is not the forced by the agriculture failure due to climate stress, because that village has the best agricultural performance. Although there are the time costs, agriculture and non-agriculture perspectives for the livelihoods for the real household, there are some restriction in terms of the gender and generational perspectives. In the farmland, the farmland preparation related to machines or cattle are traditionally mentored, and it's hindered the female household member to do that. But when the mechanization was introduced to the central dry zone, the female household member are able to lead the family when the male member are absent for the migration or for the non-farm work. Compared to the family, non-farm livelihoods are more gender-centric. For example, weaving, it's had the custom of working at home and being safe. It's for the women, as men are feeling ashamed to do that kind of job. It's the same logic posed to the other carpenters or waterway transportation, because it's determined by the local, like it's risky for the woman, or it's not appropriate to work with a group of male workers. However, both non-farm and migration demand for the younger generation of the real population. So it can be seen that the demographic feature for the farm workers are the elder generation. IPCC 2022 mentioned that smallholder farmers tend to address short-term shock or stress by defining the incremental adaptation than the transformative one. The findings in my study supported that statement, because most of the farmers are doing the incremental adaptation, although they have the clear awareness of the climate change impact on their agriculture. This is because the climate change is the really big threat to the farming household. But in the real world, the farming household need to think of the household income rather than the climate stress. In my interviews, they just mentioned like that they are living in the central dry zone for many years, so drought and irregular rainfall are not new to them. So, and also they passive, it is out of their hand. So they have to respond more to the market price. They were, even the non-farm livelihoods and migration seem to be like the more key livelihood strategy. But even it's not solely related to the climate change. They largely relied on the traditional and local resources. Many scholars have pointed out that global south need a more transformative adaptation, but the agricultural households in the central rain zone do not have the stable income, which make very vulnerable for them. And also that's why as a consequence, they were take their shorter income generation opportunity, like compared to the investing in the longer transformative one. So the Miller and McGregor discussed about the how to build that place-based rich research for transformative adaptation for example, to go beyond the central dry zones. The findings of the adaptation practice need to be compared and combined with the other adaptation practice in other regions of other countries. I would like to continue present about the limitation of my research. The original research design includes the two fieldwork, the primary fieldwork and the follow-up. The follow-up fieldwork was canceled because of the pandemic travel restrictions. And also the coup has happened in the February 2021, and it's lead to the country political turmoil till now. So it's also make it impossible to even test all the respondents in my study villages because Central Dry Zone has the strongest resistance to the military takeover, and it's become the target of the violent attack. And the primary fieldwork was collected in the 2019, and it is the era of the National League for Democracy government, and we are hoping to get the more stable democratic government. But unfortunately, after military takeover, based on my communication with my country, there's the trade policy, agricultural market, transportation, and even the rights of the freedoms of the farming household are not the same in the data collection time and current. So it seemed like a different issue between the political issues and climate change issue, but they are very related. In order to formulate the transformative adaptation, it's the institutional stabilities. To make the investment or to revise the economic revision. So it's need the economic and political stability. And for the current time, the climate change agenda for the Myanmar is not the priority, and it's become as a elusive. Thank you.
I have any questions. I'll just close this now. Okay. So are there any questions from the room or from the Zoom audience? We've got time for 3 or 4 questions or 5 minutes of questions, Jim.
Congratulations, Sandar.
Thank you.
That's you. Great to see the final presentation as well. With the, your last slide there took the quality context the fact that the influence of climate change as being felt now are probably not so significant compared to the incredible social and political changes impact people's lives in Myanmar. So that sort of, that in some ways contextualizes your research in ways, even though your research is private, you're also emphasizing how climate change is one factor. Affecting, so you're almost some ways preempting the fact that there's going to be some other major shocks to the system. What I was wondering though was that maybe you could answer this by reflecting on the developments over the last year or two, was whether climate change is affecting different people's lives in the villages differently. So I guess I can get a real, I guess, clarity over whether, for example, the poorest of the poor, are they more reliant on agriculture and more reliant on farming for their livelihood, and therefore more likely to be exposed to climate change? So one of the issues there is sort of resilience of people's livelihoods might be, even though on aggregate, there's all these off-farm opportunities highlighted, and they're not directly affected by climate change. But is there an argument to be made that before, all those who have lost their off-farm jobs, and sort of they may revert back to farming, will be more exposed to the effects of climate change, and therefore increasingly vulnerable?
I agree with you that facts that they have that different to the impact of the climate change, because basically even based on the types of the land with the access to the irrigation, alluvial land, they have the less vulnerable to the climate stress. And also in the dryland farming, yes, they are very vulnerable. Even it is also depend on the how much non-farm activity can give them for the household income. But whatever the non-farm or farming, it's both are very unstable. So it's look like for the dryland farmer, it's not very, how to say, the height differences between poor and the rich. So they step back to if they lost the non-farm job because of that kind of condition, they went back to the family. Even the family is not very stable. So I guess their vulnerability will be increased.
And then you think of like Europe, there's been a lot of households, individuals who've gone back to farm with greater uncertainty. How to keep that going?
Yeah, actually some of my study villages went down. It's very
I don't know.
Okay. I guess we have time for one more good question. We've only got a half an hour for each of the three sessions. That's the reason we
I would like to touch on the next question. Just on the presentation, how actually, yeah, people and people, you know,
I think sharing.
sorry.
So we've just totally lost the shared screen now. Sure. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just the migration has some seasonal and temporary, and some people actually for the land certificate, most of the farmers have their land certificate, but even there is for the female, it is not a female headed household, they cannot own the land certificate. So did you mention like that they have the land certificate or with the land certificate? It's about the alluvial land. Yeah. Alluvial land, it has that different. Alluvial lands have the two different. One alluvial land is like with the certificate, and it has some plot owned by the specific farmer. But the seasonal alluvial lands mean like that because there's a river here, and because of the currents of the river, sometimes in the seasonally they form like the alluvial land. It's owned by the community. They need to divide it equally, and every year it was the authority of the village head of the village tribe. So it doesn't have any certificates, and it's owned by like the community property, and they divide it every year. It was a very small percentage of the land. Normally they are prioritized to the landless person.
No, you're going to move on. Can I get one clarification? Did you just say that women, female-headed households, do not own lands to Myanmar?
It's if there is no male household, she can. But if the couple own the land title will be with the man.
That's fine. That's legally the case, but that's social norm.
It's normally it's what because when the registration land record came to the village had normally give the household had name. So household that household had is that if the male household members are there, so that they are the household heads. So it's automatically to link to the land certificate.
Okay, I think we better wind that one up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sandar. Very good. Just have to find yours, but I can't get this right up there. Just that one's yours. Yeah, that's it. Okay. Okay. Yep. All right. So James is next, and something completely different. I think.
All right, afternoon, everyone. My name's James Bakis. I'm a first year PhD student working under the supervision of Dan Penny on a project title with a working title, Reconstructing Postglacial Paleo-Environmental Change Across High Altitude New South Wales, implications for future biophysical responses to anthropogenic disturbances. It's quite a mouthful, actually. So as will become obvious, this project is heavily reliant on field work, which has not yet been undertaken, mainly due to practical restrictions associated with weather. So this talk will be more of a research proposal, outlining my objectives, motivations, methods, and so on. But I'll supplement some of my points with more concrete data and experiences from my honours project, which I completed last year, and from which this PhD project has evolved. So I'll just start by broadly outlining the project before dissecting the research objectives and motivations. So in a nutshell, this project seeks to more confidently project the biophysical and particularly abiotic changes that are likely to occur within deteriorating and or formerly threatened ecological communities across high altitude southeastern New South Wales, specifically the Snowy Mountains over here and the Monaro Tablelands. You can see where we are in New South Wales, particularly in response to future anthropogenic modifications to both regional climate and local pressures such as land use. And high altitude is quite an arbitrary definition. So in this study, we've systematically subdivided that into its four constituent bioclimatic zones, those being so starting from the tablelands down here, at around 900,000 meters, working your way up into the montane slopes, subalpine slopes, and then into your alpine zone. And within these, we've identified major formally or informally threatened ecological communities. And in so doing, we've created a sort of transect going from high to low elevation. So it's anticipated that we'll achieve these environmental prognoses by reconstructing the paleo-environmental histories around these communities in the context of past extrinsic but also intrinsic environmental perturbations since the early Holocene and possibly late Pleistocene epochs. So in any case, after the last deglaciation, so probably up to 15 to 18,000 years ago. And such reconstructions will be derived from multi-proxy analysis of accumulated sedimentary and peat sequences called from depositional sinks within or encompassing these selected ecological communities. And as we see here, we've got a pool of sites from which we've selected about 6 priority candidates. And so this multi-proxy analysis involves basically the down sequence measurement of various parameters that are influenced by and thus co-vary with environmental processes. And as such, these parameters are proxies for such processes. So that allows us to infer changes in them over millennial timescales. So essentially, we're consulting the geologic record in order to place some constraints on environmental dynamics over the past several thousand years in order to perform a more whole of system analysis of biophysical sensitivity to stressors over these timescales. This is a schematic actually I've pulled from a past honours talk, but effectively it's conveying that the traditional assumption of uniformitarianism is that the Earth surface processes operate in the same way in the past that they do in today. But if we then go a step further and apply that same logic to the future, we can ask the question, well, can you use the past to provide insight into how things will change in the future? And that's exactly what we aim to do in this project. We want to project what we see in the paleoenvironmental record and into the future in order to assess whether and to what degree changes will occur within this critical zone as anthropogenic changes to climate and land use intensify into the near to far future. So you said a lot of things, so we'll just do a walkthrough of the research objectives listed here. And for each of them, we'll ask this so what question of pertaining to research significance and relevance to the wider world. So I'm going to spend the bulk of time discussing these first 2 points as they cover most of the research aims, logic and methods. So one question that comes out of this first objective is why investigate millennial scale dynamics within these particular high altitude communities in the first place. And they're shown here for each zone, which one we've selected. So mountainous ecosystems globally are considered to be some of the most sensitive to climate change as well as the local stressors, mainly on account of their geographic restriction and steep temperature and precipitation gradients. Meaning they're disproportionately threatened by spatial retraction and dramatic shifts in baseline conditions. And this is particularly pertinent to high altitude mainland Australia, which even by global standards is extremely restricted. The alpine zone alone, I think, occupies like 0.0001% of the continental area, so very small. And as such, a range of native flora and fauna are threatened by the compounding effects of climate and local change, obviously, particularly given that in these environments, endemism typically increases with altitude. And indeed, change is already manifesting in these ecosystems, namely through the decline or partial collapse of many ecological communities as a result of temperature rise, decreased precipitation, intensified fire regimes, grazing, weed invasion, whole suite of things really. And that's causing several to have been listed as at state or federal level as threatened. And this is obviously concerning from an anthropocentric standpoint, given these biophysical systems also offer a range of ecosystem services beyond being a simple refugia for biodiversity. And these include greenhouse gas sequestration in peat bogs, water filtration, groundwater storage, sediment trapping, slope erosion mitigation, and even ecotourism to an extent. So these communities are arguably most at risk of further degradation, and therefore it's becoming increasingly vital that we enhance the resilience of them, a task that by and large conservation and land management strategies are thus far failing to achieve, as evident through increased threat listings. So if we want to accomplish this long-term resilience, then it's important that we look at the behavior of these systems over in the past over comparatively long-term millennial timescales, transcending those of that of the historical record, and over which fluctuations in climate and landscape conditions have, in many cases, been more dramatic than what has historically been observed. And so in this way, the geologic record can, in accordance with that uniformitarian logic, perhaps be used as a quasi-analog to be projected into particularly the near future and provide insights into what kind of biophysical shifts we're likely to observe. And this paleo-analog approach, it's not novel by any means, but what's important is that we're employing it at a very localized scale to inform policy, and specifically it's hoped that our findings can be incorporated into conservation and land use management to inform decisions about not only how to enhance ecosystem resilience, but also maybe return them to some sort of long-term pre-colonial baseline state. Another consideration emerging from this first objective is the actual retrieval of depositional records necessary for such reconstruction. So in our case, we require sequences from sites located within the ecological communities themselves, obviously. So, and in that situation, they would be sequestering signals of landscape change within those communities rather than elsewhere upslope, for example. And we're interested in sites that have accumulated over several millennia, but also have high enough depth and thus temporal resolution to preserve detailed changes. Now, such records in Australia are typically rare in comparison with regions like, well, most of the Northern Hemisphere, but some of our best chances of finding them are in peat bogs and fens, which are they're slowly accumulating deposits of organic matter, so they're likely to host high resolution long-term deposits. And in the Snowy Mountains, I believe there's upwards of 7,000 of these things. So we're quite spoiled for choice in the Snowy Mountains. And you've got one example here, Diggers Creek in the subalpine zone. And as such, these will be the system of choice for alpine, subalpine, and montane zones. Moreover, peat bogs and fens are themselves a threatened ecological community. So it's a sort of double whammy for us in answering our research questions. On the Monaro Tablelands, east of the Snowy Mountains, however, these bogs and fens are rare. So instead, we'll be targeting basalt-placed ephemeral lake systems, which are quite abundant. And we've got one example here, Boundary Lake, looking very full from a few months ago. And these are the systems I sampled during my honours year, Kilmacolla Lagoon and Boundary Lake. And these records are proof of concept that we can get the material and cover the time span that we need to in order to answer these research questions. And that time period is covering, as I said, the Holocene to late Pleistocene epochs. And the reason for that is there are a few systems predating this age limit in the Snowy Mountains and Monaro Tablelands. And that's pretty much due to the fact that formation of these bogs and lakes could not commence until climate amelioration initiated. So weighting of your climate initiated following the termination of dry conditions at the end of the last glacial period. And we see this in maximum basal age data for peat bogs. There are very few predating about 15,000 years. And we also see this with these, a lot of these are the Monaro lakes, and these colored dots are those that have been dated. And we see these warm dots indicate that there's not many sites that have been dated beyond 15,000 years, but obviously it's quite a small sample size so far. So we're effectively, this is time period we're investigating because there is simply no older material. In terms of fieldwork methods, i.e. how we actually sample these things, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be adopting a conventional coring approach. In the case of the alpine, subalpine, and montane bog sites, coring should be relatively straightforward. Peat's quite a soft material and easily penetrable. However, on the Monaro Tablelands, the lake systems are infilled by heavy smectite clays, and they're highly resistant to core penetration. And this was, as Dan can probably attest, made very apparent during my honours fieldwork, during which we targeted several sites and were only successful in extracting 2 viable cores from Boundary Lake here and Kilmacolla Lagoon. And cores is a very generous name. This is what we got out of them, this pile of clay clumps really that form this discontinuous sequence. So it wasn't ideal. So this time around, we'll probably have to use some sort of mechanical soil auger or something of comparable strength to overcome the resistance of these clays. But that's still up in the air at the moment, given, as we just saw, they are very full and thus inaccessible. Now, with those motivations and fieldwork methods established, objective 2 addresses the next most pressing question, which is what do I actually mean when I'm saying I'm reconstructing landscape past landscapes? So from a paleoenvironmental standpoint, high altitude Australia as a whole is vastly understudied compared to other mountain regions worldwide. But of the few studies that have been conducted, the overwhelming majority pollen studies mainly interested in reconstructing past vegetation dynamics. And whilst that is a critical research focus, particularly in these threatened ecological communities, which are vegetation, it's left a vast knowledge gap pertaining to the rest of what constitutes a high altitude ecosystem, or any ecosystem for that matter, that being the abiotic domain of the physical landscape itself, which is highly deserving of research attention, given that it's, to put it a bit poetically, it's the life support system of these higher level floral and faunal interactions. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we aim to fill that gap by reconstructing changes across a variety of surface processes, those being the main ones being surface and groundwater hydrology, soil development, erosion, deposition, nutrient cycling, and fire. And we'll also supplement this with rudimentary paleoproductivity analysis to identify any correlations between abiotic and ecological signals. Collectively, these agents are strong determinants on the structural and compositional aspects of the overlapping ecological communities, and thus their stability has significant implications for their persistence, their survival. And as I mentioned, changes in each of these processes will be inferred from a suite of paleoenvironmental proxies listed here, which are known through empirical evidence to be causally related to one or more of the aforementioned biophysical processes, which are listed alongside them, as well as their links to regional climate, if there are any. Now, the last three objectives are pretty self-explanatory. 3 and 4 sort of going hand in hand in that they convey that in order to sort of be able to reconstruct, make projections for biophysical change, we first need to line up our proxy data, and we need to be able to ascertain the respective roles of regional climate and local interactions in driving observed variability. And the way to do that is through comparison between individual proxies, as well as between site data sets from this study and others, in order to identify where, whether at all, and where and when statistical patterns are common to multiple data sets. And this will in turn allow us to determine whether observed shifts are in the data are a product of endogenous site dynamics, internal to the catchment itself, or exogenous drivers influencing many sites coevally, i.e. climate change. And once we've done that, we can evaluate how sensitive the biophysical processes we're investigating are to local and regional drivers of landscape change, in turn informing us on how landscapes and their corresponding ecological communities are likely to respond to the re-emergence and amplification of such stresses into the future. And here's an example of a similar approach that I used in my honours, which was more concerned with climate change alone. Don't worry about what all these numbers and things mean. Pretty much, I've compared my site data in black here from Boundary Lake with equivalent data from published paleoenvironmental studies across southeastern Australia in order to determine the role of climate change in driving observed variability, which, if a dominant driver, then should be manifesting across several data sets over similar time intervals. And that feeds into Objective 5 and the anticipated outcome of this project, which, and that is to present our biophysical projections in such a way that they can be useful, digestible for conservation, rehabilitation, and land use management strategies, and enable organizations and agencies to consider the long-term implications of actions on the landscape surrounding an ecological community as a whole, and thus how best to minimize or maximize negative and positive impacts respectively. And this is in contrast to the current scenario current situation where, which often involves short-term considerations based on historical observations with a heavy sort of siloed emphasis on the ecological component alone. And thus it's hoped that our knowledge contributions will strengthen policy frameworks and enhance the resilience of these communities as environmental stresses continue to amplify. And this, of course, has implications, as I said, for not only biodiversity, but the utility of various ecosystem services offered by these systems, which have significance in a national context, so effective carbon dioxide and methane sequestration in real peat bogs, as well as a local context, for example, downslope provision of water and water supply for hydroelectricity and irrigation and such. So these things have relevance to industry and livelihoods, not just the biodiversity itself. And finally, here's just a crude timeline of my project. As I said in the beginning, we haven't conducted any fieldwork yet. That's owing in part to pending access approvals, but mainly weather. We simply can't sample any cores from the high zones because they're under a blanket of snow. So that's scheduled for late summer, and that'll presumably not be a problem by then. But on the Monero, as I said, sampling was very difficult, even when these lakes were dry. So now that they're fully inundated, it'll be virtually impossible at the moment to do anything with them. So, but these are seasonal lakes, so they drain, albeit very slowly. So we'll be able to work on them a while after the rains abate. But now that we've had a triple consecutive La Nina and we've still got a negative IOD, it's not looking too great at the moment, but we'll have to wait and see. But in the first instance anyway, we've got high elevation sites that we can sample, and that's 3 zones covered, and we'll work our way down this sort of transect of sites until we reach the tablelands later on. And once these scores are changed, we can begin multi-proxy analysis in the lab, and we go from there. So I think it's pretty much all I wanted to say. I know this is a bit sort of atypical for a human geography seminar, so thanks for sticking with me. Yeah.
There's a question or reaction from a view of that instance. I mean, seems pretty epic. Scope and ambition. I'm going to agree with you. Objections, zones, in processes for exploring proxies and indicators. So my naive question is, can you do all this? You have to narrow things down to the scope and range of the project.
It's very much informed at the moment. Well, even once we start by what we can actually get out of these systems, we're presuming a lot of them won't be very viable. So we start with quite a large sample size, and we'll probably end up with probably 4 or 5 sites, and we'll have to triage them in order to focus more on certain cores than others. It is quite epic in its scope. I wanted to do some. A lot of these studies are very restricted to one site, and then they sort of just say in the end really that this is what this means for this particular site, but I want to create something of relevance to high altitude Australia as a whole, which, as I said, is probably one of the most vulnerable terrestrial systems to the stresses that I'm talking about. So yeah, I think the scope is necessary. It's just going to be, we're just going to have to find out whether we can achieve what I've laid out here, but it will definitely change form as we go on. Yeah.
2 more questions. One more fill and one from Ed. So you can decide the politics.
Yeah, we go to yeah.
Thanks very much. I certainly understand the importance of you consider the vulnerability of the things you're looking at. The part I can't quite get my head around is we've got I think the lakes are said about 15,000 years old. Thinking about reconstructing, if you want the reconstruction of those lakes, when we have the climate change perspective, atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide, and I can see 23 million years of rising. Not sure how those 2 things come together in terms of ecological reconstruction, given the vulnerability of these particular ecosystems.
Yeah, I mean, the past 50,000 years are not really comparable to what we've already seen. It's more of a sensitivity of what can we gauge from not really the ecosystems, but the actual physical environment, just soil development, your erosion. How sensitive have they been to known changes in climate and stresses in the past? And then from that, what can we say about, we sort of extrapolate that into the future once things get a lot more dramatic. But yeah, in an ideal scenario, I'd like to go back a couple of tens of thousands of years and get a lot more extreme fluctuations in conditions. But this is what we are working with. It's sort of a much milder example of perturbations to a system, and that gives us a sort of hint as to what we will have seen in the future if things become more extreme. If that makes sense.
So, yeah, the type you've got doing to put it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the next one, Dan, you might need to sit close to the front.
Yeah. Chat. Yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay.
Excellent. Nice talk. Thank you for that. Bit of a Dorothy Dixer, I think, but we're talking about how these systems, broadly defined, respond to stressors, particularly, well, global heating, I guess, but generically periods of change in climate, with climate being the primary stressor. But these landscapes are also, of course, heavily utilised by people over long periods of time. And of course, principally in Narragansett, but also the Yuin and Wiradjuri as well, we're heavily using these landscapes for many thousands of years. So to what extent are you going to be able to distinguish climate stress from anthropogenic control over these landscapes?
Yeah, I mean, like in terms of anthropogenic influences over pre-colonization, this is just a fraction of human occupation. So we're not really going to see an onset of really a reaction to Aboriginal burning regimes or anything like that, because they've already responded to them. So if we're looking at any sort of past anthropogenic influences, it's probably going to be over the last, really the colonial period. That's when things start to really ramp up. And I mean, from what is understood about the alpine environment, it wasn't as intensely used, as far as we understand, by Aboriginal people. It was sort of a seasonal meeting place. So this is really an intensely modified environment, at least not over the time period we're looking at, in terms of separating climate and anthropogenic signals. I sort of touched on it a bit, where we're going to try and compare not just our sites, but our sites with other studies. And if it is a climatic influence, then we're expecting that we're going to see a common signal in the data, whatever proxy signals are most sensitive to that. And if they're just isolated signals within one or two sites, then they're probably just a response to internal landscape feedback mechanisms and those sorts of things. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
All right. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Jamie, and thank you, everybody. This is the last thinking space for the semester, so it's quite fairly diverse range of topics I thought today. I'd just personally like to thank everyone for coming, and so I think there've been some good presentations this semester. And I, as joint coordinator with Jamie, I'd also like to really thank Jamie for his input. Probably it's nearly 2 years now, isn't it? So a year and a half. Yeah, a year and a half. Thank you. And thanks to James and Sandar for your presentations too. Okay, thank you.